On today's show, I am joined again by Glen Willis to talk about Bogdan Bogdanovic to continue our player capsule series going into Labor Day weekend, and all of that is on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1790 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday evening into Friday. And as always, on the top of the podcast, I encourage you to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the show on Apple, on Spotify, on YouTube, etc. Please tell your friends about the podcast as well. I'll be joined momentarily by Glen Willis of ATL 29, good friend of the podcast, and most frequent guest probably right now, talking about all things Hawks. We've had this player capsule series going all summer long. We talk about the entire roster in standalone episodes. Only a few more left, and today is Bogdan Bogdanovic, a big summer for Bogy. As you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm recording this out of my home studio, so my apologies for any quality issues in the outro or intro or the ads, but the rest of the discussion happened at home, and it happened a few days ago, so keep that in mind as you're hearing this podcast. Nothing should have changed in between. So all that said, enjoy this podcast. It's going to be part 1 of 2, so part 2 should be available in this same podcast feed right after part 1 is live. I wanted to give you a two-parter going into the holiday weekend, and here we go with Glen Willis and part 1. I'm joined again by my friend Glen Willis of ATL and 29 to continue our player capsule series. Glen, how are you as the calendar nears September?
I'm good. Tis the season for fantasy football drafts, and it might surprise people that I spend about 15 minutes prepping for that stuff. So trying to squeeze that in too. But yeah, I mean, basketball season will be here before we know it.
That's right. And Glen and I are actually in a fantasy football league together, so we will not divulge any secrets on this podcast before our draft / is it auction? I think it's an auction league that we're in. Yeah, it is. Anyway, plenty to get to, as always, when Glen comes on, and I will shout him out right now at the top that he's done a ton of these with me. We've done most of the roster this summer at this point. There are still a few holdouts. The 2 most high-profile players have not been done yet, Trae Young and Jalen Johnson. And then I think Onyeka is still left on the list somewhere, but we are around. We're coming around the bend as we get into September, and Media Day is closing in. But today is going to be Bogy, and Bogy is a player that I feel like, and maybe it's because of the Olympics this year, I've been evangelizing even more than usual about, because I've always been quite high on Bogy, especially the last couple of years when it felt like he hasn't gotten the attention that he probably deserves. He got some attention this summer playing with Serbia, threatening considerably to win the gold medal. They probably should have, in some respects, won the gold medal at the end. But taking a 1,000-foot view here, Glen, what do you make of the Bogdan Bogdanovic experience as he enters his age 32 season?
Yeah, to me, he's like the other irreplaceable guy, on this roster, right? I mean, it's been an interesting ride along the way since he can't be a sign and trade, right? So, there's been times when his health has been low and he's not making shots and he can't move, and Hawks fans like, trade him. You got to get rid of him. Just even if he have to attach a pick. And of course, they don't make the Eastern Conference Finals in 21 if he doesn't have multiple magical fourth quarters in that series. And so for me, you look at what he does, and we'll get into all the stuff that he does that helps the team. We'll get into his limitations on defense and how the Hawks have to. We can talk about, are the Hawks better equipped now to be successful building defensive lineups when he's on the floor? But for me, it's like he just does stuff that very few people in the league can do. And a short list of guys who can kind of create their own three, need literally no space to get his three off. Doesn't need to have the ball kind of passed to him to set it up. He's a great catch and shoot, but he can create his own shot from well beyond the 3-point line. There just aren't that many guys in the league that can do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of lay it out. And, I would imagine that people that are not watching every Hawks game may know that Bogey's a good player. I think that's probably universally understood by people that watch the NBA. But the fact that he virtually is irreplaceable for the Hawks is notable. And part of that is roster construction. The Hawks don't have a lot of shooting, and we've talked about that in different ways. I did with Tyler about a week ago when we talked on this podcast. People listen to this pod. That's part of it for sure. Bogey is by far the best shooter on the team. Obviously Trae's a little bit different of a shooter, but he's the one sort of dynamic guy. Garrison's the other archetype of that, but Bogey's just going to play a lot more than Garrison, all those things. And then the second part of that is that Bogey's really, really good. And I feel like I've gotten the rare accusation of homerism with Bogey last year when I was pretty outwardly talking about how I thought he was, if not clearly, certainly would have been my vote for Sixth Man of the Year last season. And I'm not a big awards guy, but I felt like it was actually a pretty easy case to make. Unfortunately, the Hawks won 36 games, and generally speaking, teams that don't have team success don't get awards, and that's just the nature of the beast, which is what happened there. But independent of all that, I think that he's a really, really valuable player. Tyler's argued, and I don't think he's necessarily wrong. Maybe obviously this is a dealer's choice kind of thing, but he might have been their second best player last season. The metrics point to that in some ways. In fact, in EPM, this is just one metric. And for people that don't like advanced metrics, you might ignore this. That's fine. EPM is probably the one that I would say is the most trusted around the league right now. They have this estimated wins metric where it's a combination of their impact plus how often you play. And it's their way of projecting how many wins you were worth over the course of the season. I say all that to say, Bogey finished 36th in the entire NBA last year in this metric. And that feels reasonable to me, given the way that he played, given how good. We'll come back to this, but how much better the Hawks were with him on the floor last year. There's always a little bit of noise on-off metrics. I will be the first to say that, but it was not a fluke, in my opinion. They were that much better with him on the court. Again, like you said, he's irreplaceable in the way that he does things skill-wise, but he's also really, really good. So we'll get into all that. We'll get back to the defense later on because that's the less sexy side of the floor for Bogey, to be sure. But one thing I'll make sure before I forget to say this, Bogey's coming, and I'm knocking on wood as I'm doing this. I'm doing it softly as to not interrupt the audio portion of this podcast. But Bogey just had by far his most durable season in the NBA. He played 79 games last season. That was a career high by one. He played 78 as a rookie with the Kings. He was an older rookie after playing in Europe, so he was like a mid-20s rookie. But 79 games, he played by far his career high in minutes, about 2,400 minutes. That's a lot of minutes in the NBA. And, for a long time, he's had these knee issues, which I don't mean to dwell on them, but they've been the reality. The Hawks have pretty openly managed him, not necessarily giving him days off too much, maybe even less than I think I would have liked along the way, but they have not started him that's part of why they haven't started him a lot. That's part of why he's not playing 35 minutes a game. He's more in that 29-30 range. We don't know moving forward how much he's going to play because they have a new training staff. And we're talking in late August. I will raise my hand and say, I don't know what this training staff's going to prioritize. They have obviously not met with the media, but this is the dead zone of intel on what they're going to prioritize. I would assume that they're probably going to keep managing Bogey to some degree. I don't think he's going to be suddenly playing a Tibbs level of workload at age 32, but that's part of this too, is he hasn't played that much. And this, Glenn, there is a stigma in some corners about guys who don't start. And you get profiled as a bench player. You probably remember this, Glenn, but when he first got here, there was a little bit of noise that he wasn't going to like coming off the bench. You remember that 4 years ago? Because I do. Yep. That was kind of out there. And I heard the same thing. 4 years later, I think Bogey settled in quite nicely to that role. He also might start opening night this year because he's the best shooting guard on the team, and pretty obviously. So that's lots of different directions we can go down. But I think it's a very interesting season for Bogey. He got the extension. He's making a pretty cheap amount of money for what he actually brings. He's now much more clearly in a more prominent role offensively because DeJounte is not there, and he's probably, along with Jalen, in line for number two responsibility, in big quotes, number two responsibilities. So I feel like if he hasn't gotten the attention already that he probably should have gotten, maybe he gets it now because the role is going to be so much clearer for him, even from a optical standpoint. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors, and passion, drive, and patience for the formula of winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. At eBay Motors, they have everything you need to maintain your vehicle, also level it up to peak performance. They have superchargers, they have roof racks, they have exhaust kits, they have LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, into power, or into style, they have you covered across the board at eBay Motors. They have over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, and you will always, always find exactly what you're looking for at eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts also guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money's coming back to you, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, but you are not burning any cash. With all the parts that you need at the price that you're looking for, it's easy to turn that car that you have into the MVP that you are seeking and bring home that win that you desperately need. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. One more time, the place to go is ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see whether he starts or not. And the journey, I like that you mentioned when he got here, there was some noise that he kind of had an expectation he was going to start, right?
Yep.
And with the contract he got, the transaction that got him to Atlanta, it kind of made sense that those expectations might come along. Fans are probably tired of hearing me say this. When Bogy says we need to sacrifice more, he has done the things that allows him to say that.
Yep.
Right? Because a lot of players of his caliber on a team that's not even playing 500 basketball would be like, what the heck? I can help the team more if I'm starting, But Bogy hasn't done that, right? And so that allows him to kind of say some of the things, considering that he has led by example in the area of kind of sacrificing. It is interesting to me that with I'm convinced Dyson's going to start, right? We don't know until we get there, but I feel like that's the likely outcome. They just need that defense so much. And then it really is Hunter or Bogy. And, and for me, like that's the way you think about it. And everybody like, Bogey's a 2 guard, but he's played a lot of 3 last year. Part of that was the Hawks didn't have small forwards on the roster when Hunter got hurt, right? So it is going to be interesting because we'll talk about his defensive issues, but him playing along with Dyson Daniels is a vastly different defensive formula than him playing along with DeJounte Murray, right? And that's not me, ripping on DeJounte. DeJounte's a point guard sized defender, and Dyson just is not that. So for me, it's gonna be interesting to see. I expect he'll come off the bench just because I think if they're gonna play Kobe at backup point guard, he's gonna need Bogy there. If Dyson's going to be kind of the secondary ball handler with Kobe, they're going to need, we can say every lineup needs Bogy, but those younger players that are scaling up, but those younger players that are presumably scaling up a bit in role and scaling up a bit in offensive work share load, will need Bogy, right? So in that sense, I think that suggests he'll come off the bench. But I mean, for me, it's kind of funny. So he got to Atlanta when they made their run to the conference finals. People tried to say this too, but they were second in the league in efficiency and spot up opportunities. And after they made that run, they totally changed the roster. Nate changed the coaching staff. They fell to 29th in efficiency and spot up shooting the following year. And their offense, somehow Trae still got them into the top 10 in offense, despite that massive fall off in shooting capability. And when Nate was coaching them, they ran a lot of floppy. They called it horns down. And it just, to me, it's like one of those things that I think back to the Nate era, and like nobody runs single isolated action anymore. Like if you're running floppy, you're bringing a pin down to the shooter, lifting off that screen. You're doing something on the other side of the floor, right? To stress the other side of a 4-2, not underneath. The Hawks were just running floppy and one guy screening, one guy coming off the screen, the other 3 guys standing there, right? And when you look at what Quinn's doing, I felt like Quinn offensively got his team to take like a quarter a step in the direction of the offense he wants to run. And we'll see if they take a much, much bigger step this coming year. But you're running something on the strong side, you're running something on the weak side. It's synced up to kind of create as much stress and to occupy both sides of the defensive floor there. And Bogy gives you so much on that. If you run him on a DHO on the strong side, 3 defenders on that side kind of trying to take space away from him as a shooter, you get more space on the weak side. If you're trying to run him through 2 out or 3 out, which is the pick and roll at the 3-point break, the whole defense reacts to him. And then against high-level defenses, like, say, the Celtics, say the Heat when they're at their fully healthy, other top defensive teams, If Bogey's one of those guys that if he can't get space coming up to the HO, he just needs one dribble relocation, two dribble relocation, whatever, and he needs his trigger is so quick. He just needs he can create he needs inches to get his shot off, and it's really remarkable how often he makes those shots in late shot clock when it's just him with a defender right in his face, and it looks like there's no way he's gonna get separation. He's not this big time athlete that gets separation with his athleticism, but it's his craft and the tools skills that he has to kind of create that separation through skill. And I'm saying there aren't probably 5 guys in the league that are better than him at that. It's remarkable how good he is at that, and that's really meaningful when you are still in Trae going on. What is this, year 7? He's going into 6, 7. I can't remember. He's going into, but you need a guy like Bogy. If the opposing defense is going to load up on Trae, a guy who has all of that skill. The Hawks don't have anybody else right now that can do a quarter of what Bogy does in that role on offense.
We definitely agree. I want to circle back later to the really interesting, actually, like lineup and pairing decisions, like an impact that he has. That we definitely agree that he is. If you could clone him, the Hawks would be in much better shape, kind of thing. And we'll come back to that later. But on his individual skill set, let's just talk about that for a second. You just laid it out what he does really well. I think he gets pigeonholed sometimes as a shooter, and I don't mean that in a negative way because he is one of the best shooters in the world. And I don't say that lightly. I actually mean that. Like, you got Steph in his own tier, basically, and I could argue Bogey's in the next tier down. The numbers bear that out. Just for a couple of samples. Last year, he was 6th in the NBA in total 3-pointers made, coming off the bench. He was 3rd in the league in free throw percentage, which is a good indicator of your shooting prowess, we could say. He has shot 39.1% from 3 since he joined the Hawks 4 years ago. That's a really, really good number for anybody. Then you add in the volume. And the volume is 7.5 attempts per game, again, off the bench for the majority of that time. Here's the other massive one, 12.3 per 100 possessions. That is elite volume. So to shoot 39%, let's just say 39% are not created equal. And this is not a pejorative against DeAndre Hunter, who shot in that range last year. Hunter's doing that on mostly open catch and shoot shots. Not all, but mostly. Bogey's doing it on way more volume and way more difficult attempts. Deeper attempts, more guarded attempts, as you just laid out, all those things. And, it's almost 1,800 attempts now in the NBA that he has taken from 3-point. Sorry, not even in the NBA, as a Hawk in 4 years. And, to say all that, he is a great shooter, elite shooter. Whatever word you want to use, you can't go strong enough unless you want to say he's the best shooter in the world, because I wouldn't go there because that's Steph. There's a Steph tier. I promise you he might be in the next tier down. So I say that. We can all acknowledge that, I hope. And that's his scouting report for people that don't know him that well. It's like, oh, great shooter. True. Watching him all the time, and even in Sacramento and pre-Sacramento. I mean, I remember when he was coming over, all those things from Europe when he was like 25. He's a really, really skilled on-ball player. He is. He can run a pick and roll. He's a totally fine passer. He's not a great passer. He's not a great ball handler, but for like a secondary ball handler, there's a reason I talked about with you, I'm sure, already in some of these capsules with Tyler last week, is that when Trae sits, they're going to need Bogy not only for gravity as a shooter, but also for his playmaking. Bogy is a very underrated playmaker, for other people and for himself. Now, this summer is a good time to do this because he's the number one creator on the perimeter for Serbia. They don't really play an NBA style necessarily, but he's the guy they throw the ball to when things are rough, and it's not Jokic, basically. He's their second best player. But in the NBA, that's probably what's going to happen this year a lot. Like, if Trae's off the court, he's going to be their primary. I mean, I know there's a lot of hope, and I share in this hope that Jalen's going to take this massive step forward. But right now, today, Bogey's a lot more trusted as a creator in the half court than Jalen. It's not even particularly close. So you could say he's the number 2 option, all that stuff. But I just want to say that out loud, and I'll let you respond to it. Like, the fact that I understand why he's billed in some corners as this great shooter, because he is. but he is not a specialist. He's not even anywhere close to a specialist. Garrison Matthews, while I enjoy his work, is a specialist on the offensive end of the floor. Bogy is the furthest thing from a specialist. He's a great shooter that also could do a lot of other stuff on offense.
And it's funny to think about him as a passer, as a creator. As with anyone who's not a point guard, as with anyone who Bogy does his work mostly through skill and craft and not through athleticism, right? So if Hawks fans want to kind of imagine with me for a second, when Bogy can work toward the base, work, say, through the nail and go towards the rim straight on and have any sort of line that's more direct to the rim, direct to the paint, he's a fully functional passer, right?
Yep.
Because of his limited foot speed and because of his limited burst or whatever other words you want to use, when defenses can make him go east-west and make him go horizontal to the baseline, that's when he really gets diminished as a creator. And that's because of his lack of athleticism. And so that's why Quinn, looks at a guy like Dyson who can cut, right? He needs cutters to cut. Like when Bogy gets cut off and can't kind of work past the defender, can't work past the help defender, gets kind of stuck down on that lane going horizontal to the baseline instead of going more at the paint, the rim. He needs guys to move around him and work with him. And Quinn, that's why Quinn really believes in that off-ball movement and all that sort of stuff. So if Hawks fans want to be like, man, there were some really ugly possessions he had last year. Yeah, there was, right? Because when he's Trae's out for a month and a half, 2 months, whatever, DeJounte's on the bench. You literally have nobody else that can create with the dribble. Literally no one else, right?
Yeah.
And Bogy's like, I got to do this. And when two defenders can kind of cut off his path to the paint, cut off his path toward the rim and getting him going horizontal to the baseline, that's where his limitations really do show up. And so we're going to talk about the defensive pairings that would help Bogy be, have his defensive downside more mitigated on defense. But on offense also, guys who understand Bogy has this limitation. Here is the kind of help he needs from the other guys on the floor when we notice that he's getting cut off by his defender plus a help defender. That processing, that IQ of guys on the floor with him is critical to people, to the Hawks having Bogy kind of be able to get himself out of trouble, right? And so, if Hawks fans are like, oh my God, these guys are talking about Bogy like he walks on water, these guys, he has limitations, right?
Definitely.
I mean, he is one of the, to me, he's one of the, I don't know where you want to draw. He's one of the 10 best shooters in the league in my mind, when you consider his self-creation, all that sort of stuff, right? When he's on the floor without Trae, without DeJounte last year, and the Hawks literally have no one else, he tried to be the guy that was creating. But when it was him and four other guys who were spot-up shooters or in the dunker spot or whatever, that is when his limitations show up on offense.
Yeah.
And so it's not just on defense where limitations can show up if he's not in the proper lineup construction. It's on offense. And the limitations are fewer on offense by a lot, but that's just, I wanted to kind of lay that one out because that's one that will kind of jump out at you from time to time.
It's a great point, and I think it's useful when we talk about, and I'm doing this too, that and I made this point, and I'm sure Quinn's going to do this. Well, I'm not sure, but I'm confident. I'd be trying to have Bogy on the court whenever Trae's off the court. And that doesn't mean that Bogey's going to be your Lord and Savior when Trae sits. It's a great point by you because Bogy is not a number one creator in the NBA. He's not. Like a number one, I'm going to run your offense creator in an ideal world. I think in any construction this year, you're going to want him next to at least someone like Dyson, but Kobe, somebody else that can run some stuff. Jalen, hopefully, gets to that point. He can run some stuff for you. It's not a situation where you're right. It does not look great when Bogy's got to be the guy in capital letters. If he was the guy, he'd be making $30 million a year. You know what I mean? That's the one thing he kind of can't do on offense, to your point. But he does make life easier, and you can run stuff through him sometimes, which makes it a big plus. He's not who could I use? He's not Duncan Robinson, where you can't throw him the ball. You know what I mean? And I think there's some corners might describe him as like this specialist, and he's not that. But you're also 100% right. He's not someone you're going to be like, all right, Bogy, have a 35% usage rate tonight. He's not really going to be that guy for you, I don't think. Well, he does that sometimes in Europe, I will say. I mean, in international play, but again, you're playing with Jokic.
Yeah.
You're playing with
Jokic, and that changes everything. Yeah, but even in the last 2 or 3 games that they played in the Olympics, you saw him in crunch time, defensive load up on him, and he didn't have the athleticism to burst, and he got tired. Right? He for sure he had so much responsibility on that team. He got 100%. Tired, and there were some ugly passes down the stretch, and people were like, "Oh my God, Bogey!" Like that was. Defense is using 2 to 3 defenders to cut him off and get him stuck without his dribble, and that's the stuff that'll show up in the NBA too if they don't help him in the way that he needs to be helped as a creator.
Yeah, actually reminds me. I pulled this stat. He was in the top 30 of the league last year in qualified players and turnover rate. Like, he is a very low turnover player. Yeah. I will acknowledge that he does throw some funny bad passes sometimes, and he also has some funny defensive plays sometimes. We'll come back to that. So it's not like he doesn't make errors. He does, but he's not a high turnover player. He's a very efficient player in general.
Yeah.
He'll move the ball for you. Good.
He will, but to me, like, offensive turnovers is like 50% of team stat, 50% individual stat.
Also true. Yep.
Very situational. So, yeah. So.
Yeah. No, he's not perfect by any means. Talk about secondary ball handling. One thing that maybe we can use to transition a little bit into how the Hawks are going to maybe play a little as far as like lineups and things. That's the questions we get this time of year in particular. I've always made this point, but people are coming into these cold or don't know the Hawks. In some ways, you wouldn't think Trae and Bogy would be the greatest pairing in the world because, as we'll get into in a second, Bogey's defense is limited. Trae's defense is famously limited, as we all know. But I say this without a hint of anything. It has always worked. Always. The numbers point to it. Trae and Bogy has always worked. And you might not think it would work defensively. And look, there are certain nights, certain opponents where if that's your backcourt, if that's your 1 and the 2, you're going to be in trouble defensively. It's fair to say. But the combination of those two guys, number one, they enjoy playing with each other. That's well documented. Bogey's high on the list of guys Trae trusts. It's very clear. Trae trusts Bogy and vice versa with good reason, but it's always worked. And usually it's the offense going through the roof. But as far as like starting lineups and all that stuff is concerned, I get it. Every time I bring up Trae and Bogy on a national platform, it's like, oh man, that defense. I'm like, yep, 100% true. And what you brought up earlier, yeah, maybe you need dice in between those guys to make it work against starters. I'm not saying you don't. What I am saying is every lineup thing. I won't name all the numbers. I have them pulled in front of me right now. Every season they've been here, it has worked. It's been better than the team overall. Every construction of last year when the team was not very good most of the season, Trae and Bogy lineups worked. Trae and Bogy minus DeJounte, so just Trae and Bogy lineups were even better. Like every single time, every year, I went back all 4 years. They have been notably better than their rest of their team stuff with Trae and Bogy on the court. Not a coincidence.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you think about how does that work? Well, when you have a couple of limited defenders on the court, one of the best ways to help yourself is put the ball through the basket.
Score a lot.
Yeah, give yourself the chance to set your defense, right? You're not scrambling back in transition. You're not getting matched up however you get matched up. You're not getting matched up in some random ad hoc sort of way. You're getting back and you're getting set up the way that you want to. The Hawks still, obviously, the statistically, no way around the fact that they were, quite an upside-down defensive team from start to finish last year. But one of the ways that Bogy and Trae on the court can help you is just they generate offense. They generate made baskets. And they get collectively, they get the free throw line a good decent bit, and just all that stuff helps you set your defense. It gives you just I don't know if it's 10% better chance for success, 20%, whatever. 10 to 20% better chance for success on offensive possession is a lot. And playing off made baskets is one of the most helpful things you can do.
It is, no question about that. And as you get into constructions and things like that, I think both things are true where I'm going to laugh about trying to clone Bogy again, but you both want Trae with Bogy and you also want Bogy on the court when Trae sits. And there's that balance, right? It's going to be the same thing when we talk about Jalen and front court stuff. This is a fascinating team as we've alluded to many times already this summer, about like how Quinn's going to do several things lineup wise. They have a lot of guys. How they all fit together is going to be very interesting. High on that list is what they're going to do in the backcourt. And, I've used this stat 100 times, but the Hawks were truly awful whenever Bogy was off the court last year. And do you want to, maybe there was a little bit of noise in there as we get into his defense in a second, actually. This would be a good way to transition to that. Yes, I don't think that Bogy's defensive impact is actually as good as a number like EPM found it to be last year. And part of that is that the Hawks were better as a team with Bogy on the court defensively. Do I believe that's Bogy? Probably not. But what I do know is that the Hawks were pretty good with Bogy on the court, no matter who was around him. This is not even a Trae thing. This is a Bogy by himself with 4 other players. +2 net rating last year with Bogy on the court. Bogy off the court, and I swear I looked this up 3 times to make sure I wasn't wrong, but it is right, -8.0 net rating with Bogy off the court, no matter who was playing. And Bogy didn't start for the team last year. It's like, if that's one of those numbers that you see and it's like, oh, that must be Trae's on off. Nope, that's Bogy's on off. They were that bad with Bogy off the court, no matter who was playing. That's like, just to say this out loud, that's like the Pistons from last year. -8.0 is a bottom 5 team in the league bad, like horrible.
Yeah, that's a 1/10 of a point per possession. That is a big number.
It's insane. I mean, 10 points per 100 possession. It's unbelievably. That's like the gap between the Celtics and a 500 team, or if you want to go the other way, between a 500 team and the Wizards. That's the gap, or bigger even.
Yeah, yes, it's massive, and it's interesting to think about this to me, and we don't have to roll back and talk about Sadiq a lot, but this is where they will miss Sadiq. I don't care what Sadiq shot last year. I don't care. I know Sadiq shoot, right? And we talked about the fact that when he had to start driving because they didn't have any other drivers, that it changed his offensive role. I said on Twitter at the end of the season, he had one of the most unselfish seasons I've ever seen a player have heading into restricted free agency. Part of that is what got him injured, is all of the work he was doing, how hard he playing every single game, right? All that sort of stuff. But like, to me, I trusted Sadiq to eventually find his way back to shooting last year at some point, right? And he had stretches. He had a few weeks here and there where it would work. They don't have anyone like that on this roster right now. To expect that from Ricochet in his rookie season, I don't know why you would expect that, right?
He's going to have to do some of it, but yeah, you're right, 100%.
Right, but he's going to have to work up to, and that's that's probably more of a year 2 thing. Kobe Buffkin, can you expect that from him? No, right? Sadiq had a fast release, could shoot on the move, right? And I know that didn't work out for him last year, right? I know that Hawks fans are like, what are you talking about, Glenn? He shot, I don't know, what he shoot 33%, whatever it was, from the 3-point line, whatever it was. But they just don't have a guy like that on the team, right now. And that's the whole, right? So for me, that probably helps Garrison get on the floor more. And we talked about it, like, I feel like Veit and Garrison are kind of battling for kind of that last rotation spot. It might be situational, and we all love Veit. But you also have to respect the fact that Garrison is probably one of the top, 25 shooters in the league himself, right? We consider depth, distance, right, all that. I mean, he will just let it fly without any conscience. That's part of being a good shooter. And so it is going to be interesting to me because a couple examples. That Miami playing game 2 years ago, Quinn spammed Bogy plus Bay lineups for long stretches in that game, and the Heat could not do anything with it, right?
Yep.
In that Celtics series, right, the Bogy and Bay lineups is what Quinn really leaned into to create spacing, in the middle of the floor, and especially the DJ missed the game because of the suspension, et cetera, et cetera. And so Quinn Quinn rode that early on in his tenure coaching the Hawks. Quinn does not have a pairing like that for next year, unless he uses Garrison in sort of a makeshift kind of way, in that sense. But obviously Bay's, had his defensive issues too, but he's just a lot bigger than Garrison, right? So he has a little bit more defensive portability in that way. And so it's going to be interesting to see the way Quinn creates lineup constructions on offense. We're talking about the defense that gives Bogy the chance to use all of his capability, right? And that's something that I don't really see right now. Maybe Dyson shoots better than he has before. Does Trae work off the ball a little bit more when Bogey's on the? There's a lot of different ways it could go. I know Glenn would say weak side movement, ball movement, cutting, and I know Quinn would probably talk us through kind of all these different things. But the easiest way is just put a really, really high level shoot on the weak side, weak side offensive floor, and create someone who has the gravity to make the defense play and honor both sides of the floor. Right now, I don't know who does that I don't know, besides Garrison, I don't know who can do that. And Garrison has other limitations you have to think about as well.
All right, that is all for part one with myself and Glen Willis talking all things Bogdan Bogdanovic. Part two should be available in the same podcast feed right now. So go ahead and listen to that conversation as soon as possible. Please go ahead also and subscribe to this podcast anywhere you find podcasts. Just search Locked On Hawks at Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Overcast. We're also on YouTube. Please like this episode as you are watching it and subscribe on that platform. Tell your friends about the show too. I definitely would be grateful to go ahead and pass that along to everyone in your life that might have interest in the Hawks. That would definitely help me in the future. Please follow us on social media as well. We are on Twitter /X at Locked On Hawks. I am also there at BT Rowland. Follow my non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. And with all of that said, stay tuned for part two, and we'll see you all next time.